Alright, with all the ammo shortages and everything, a lot of people are forced into buying ammunition they normally wouldn't touch. So what's the deal? What should I be feeding my AR? What should I be looking for? What are the differences in ammo? What's desirable? What's not desirable? So we're just going to take a broad stroke. There's a lot more to it than what I'm going to go through in this video. But because of ammo limitations, etc., 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 we're just going to go base information. Just generally what's going on. The first one, materials. So there's really two different types of bullets you're going to run into. There's your FMJ. Notice it's not magnetic. Then you got your green tip, which just has a steel slug inside of it, but it's still a copper jacketed bullet with lead in there. And then you got your steel case. Notice how the bullet's magnetic? Now, it's drastically different from this one. This is a copper jacketed bullet with a steel slug inside. This is not a copper jacketed bullet. This is called a bimetal bullet. What that means is the jacket is actually made out of a metal, and then they just put a copper paint job on it. It's not actually paint, it's called a copper wash. But basically they just dip it in copper. When people are talking about steel case being bad, there's a bunch of different reasons. One, typically it comes from some foreign country, typically a country that's either ex-communist or currently communist. And how they measure the charge is very inconsistent, which slaughters the accuracy. Another way is because there is a lacquer on this. Now, does the lacquer really do a lot? I haven't seen a lot in my experience. However, the sealant, that little red crap on the primer, that does do damage. Not damage that isn't repairable, but it plugs up your firing pinhole. And if you shoot a lot of steel case, you'll notice your bolt face is all red. And if you keep shooting it, like you're actually a person that shoots a lot, it'll plug up your firing pinhole and cause it not to fire. You'll get a light primer strikes. But the main reason why this is bad, unlike your FMJ bullet, this is just a copper wash on there. It's very, 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 can't stress this enough, extremely thin. So what's going to happen, instead of having a nice soft metal like copper on your rifling, you're going to have steel on your rifling. You'll notice it a lot, say you were to shoot handgun. If you're running steel case out of your handgun, you'll see sparks fly out of the muzzle. Or if you're shooting like a higher quality FMJ, you will not. You'll still get your fireball, but you won't see the random sparks shooting off in different directions. These kill your barrels. Bad. Actually, Lucky Gunner, he never did a video on this, but if you go to his website, he's got an article. Excellent article. He got 4 AR-15s, all exactly the same. Ran one with your standard FMJ, ran the other 3 with steel case. Those steel case ones were done. The accuracy started reducing, I believe, at 4,000 rounds, and the barrel was completely shot by 6,000 rounds. If I remember correctly, and I haven't looked at the article in a while, he ran the FMJ all the way up to 10,000 rounds. So what does that mean? If you're running steel case ammo, every 2 magazines, you've killed your barrel by 1%. That means you get 200 total magazines, and that's best case scenario, and your barrel is completely shot. 1 second. Especially with inventory problems, stuff like that, I strongly recommend, if at all possible, do not play with steel case. If you shoot that barrel out, especially with the current administration coming and what they've been talking about they want to do, you may not be able to replace that barrel. You may be stuck with the barrel you have for the rest of your life. Your children may have to use that barrel. Go with a higher quality ammo. You'll thank me later. Now, I've been saying that for years, and everybody's like, well, I'll just replace the barrel, and at the price I save off a steel case, I could buy 3 barrels. Yeah, until you're not allowed to buy barrels anymore. What if the ATF decides that, hey, so since the lower receiver doesn't count as a firearm, we'll make it a complete firearm. So if you want to change out a barrel or something, You either got to send it back to the manufacturer and have it reserialized, or you just can't. Your aftermarket options may not be there much longer. If you've already ran steel case, it may not be a bad idea to grab another barrel. If you have a bunch of steel case, it may not be a bad idea to grab another barrel. Which brings up the question, why the hell do all the AK people run steel case? You know how hard it is to change a barrel in an AK? Yeah, with an AR, it's just a couple of quick, simple tools. If I want to change an AK barrel, I need a fully furnished machine shop. But alright, enough with my rant. So alright, you got steel case, or bimetal bullets. Then you got your steel core. Well, it's not really steel core, it's just a steel slug. And then you're just your straight up FMJ. The penetration power between these is irrelevant. I've seen them tested through and through and through and through. I've never seen, maybe there's some odd test or some off-the-wall test or this very special circumstance, but I've never seen this 62 grain with the steel slug outperform the 55. Again, if there is some sort of test, that is the exception, it's not the rule. The rule is these will penetrate equally. Bullet weight. So what are we talking about here? With 5.56, your main ones are M193, M855, and your 77 grain. Now there's also a 68, but that pretty much got obsoleted by the 77. But due to the climate we're in right now, you might start to see the weird ones pop back up like 68 grain, etc. So which one should I run? Should I run the heavy 77 grain and get more kinetic energy and more killing power? Should I run the lighter 55? What's going on here? Alright, so this is the gist of how it breaks down. Now, what I'm about to talk about all came out of a 20-inch barrel. That was the only one where I could find similar specs. This information will vary out of like 16s. But anyway, 2,100 feet per second. I call it 22 just to be safe. That's the magic number. At 2,200 feet per second, it doesn't matter what tip you have. Because at 2,200 feet per second, it flies through your target so quick, it puts in hydraulic pressure, it causes damage that you will not get. Because it moves material out of the way faster than 2,200 feet per second, it moves it out of the way so rapidly, it causes ripping and tearing and makes a very large permanent wound cavity. You get slower, then it's only destroying what's directly in front of the bullet with crushing power. So, above 2,200 feet per second, kinetic energy is pretty much irrelevant. What that's just going to tell you is how far it can go into your target. It's not going to tell you how much damage it can do to your target, but how far it can go. A lighter bullet does its damage quicker because kinetic energy just don't disappear. It's got to go somewhere. And it'll put it really fast in a very short window. As the bullet gets heavier, there's more kinetic energy contained in mass instead of velocity, so it will travel a little bit farther. But when you're talking about the difference in like 20 grains, that's really not that much. So, out of these projectiles, what should you run? Now there's a couple of exceptions, we'll talk about this. M193, that's the one you want to run. Your 55 grain projectile is king all the way up to 300 yards. Nothing outperforms this. It flies faster, it gets to the target quicker, there's less wind resistance, you're going to have less bullet drop. 55 grain, king. Now, past 300 yards, things get a little bit different. That's where your 77 kicks in. Because it's a longer bullet, it has better aerodynamics, it has a better ballistic coefficient, it can hang on to its muzzle, kinetic energy and velocity longer. And it passes 55 grain at 300 yards. Because remember, 55 grain is starting at 3250, 77 grain is starting at 2750. So it's got to catch up and then ultimately pass. And again, that's where they drop below 2,200 feet per second. Pretty much all 5.56 ammo is 300 yards moving slower than 2,200 feet per second. So if you are designing a rifle specifically where the rule is past 300 yards, the exception is within 300 yards, go 77. But you want to design your rifle for what you want the rule to be. Most AR-15s play inside 300 yards, so without a doubt, your 55 grain M193 is the best choice. Hands down. King until 300 yards. If the exception is past 300 yards, you go 55 grain. If the exception is inside of 300 yards, then you go 77. Now, one of the exceptions would be your M855. That is an exception because all your modern military sights are calibrated for the M855. That would be your A2 carrying handles, the new one that the military's got on their M4s where it just slides up and down. All that is calibrated for a 62 grain M855. If you don't run that, yeah, you'll probably be close, but we're not looking for close. We want to line up. This will be as close as possible. So if you're running some sort of military configuration sight like an A2 or something like that, then yeah, you go with a 62. Or if you get an ACOG and that particular ACOG is calibrated for something specific, chances are it'll be calibrated for your 62 grain. So make sure to look up the model number and find out for sure, because it might be calibrated for a 55. But because the ACOG pretty much comes from the military, chances are it'll be calibrated for a 62. You want to run whatever your sights are calibrated for so you have a higher likelihood of connecting with your target. Twist rate. So do I have to worry about twist rate? Well, yes and no. If you're running something crazy slow like a 112, you're stuck with a 55, which is okay. This is a great projectile. Anything above 112, especially like a 19, you'll be able to stabilize anything you can shove inside your magazine. Unless you find some sort of crazy hunting projectile that's like an 80 grain or a 90 grain, anything you can fit inside your magazine, you can stable for sure with a 18. But out of my Bushmaster, which had a 19, I shot 77s out to 300 yards, no stabilization problem. I even shot 80 grains, no stabilization problem. Or was it an 80 grain? I don't know, some Hornady long-range bullet, but I had to actually take a fingernail clipper and cut some of the tip off to make it fit in the magazine because it had a red ballistic tip, which made it too long, so I had to cut it back a little bit. The point is, a 18, no matter what, you can stabilize everything. A 19, every barrel is an individual. There's a possibility you can stable 77s. What you're going to have to do is just buy a box of 77s and shoot it at range. But again, why would you want to run a 77? You go with a 55. If the rule is within 300 yards, you want to prepare for the rule. Yes, having a little bit towards the exception is nice, but always prepare for the rule and leave some little bit for the exception, but you work around the rule. You're not going to go clear a house with a bolt gun in 308 because the rule is they're all going to be inside 10 yards. That's an extreme example, but you get the idea. You're not going to go out, sit on the corner of a field to prairie dog hunt with a MAC-10. You want to prepare for the rule? Yes, the exception you got to think about. You can't totally forget about it, but prepare for the rule. This is what you're going to want to run. 55 grain, unless you meet one of those exceptions. Anyway, I hope this video had helped you out a little bit. If you'd like to help support the channel, got my Patreon link right there. I also have an Amazon affiliate link in the description. Even if you don't buy what that link is for, just click it on that link. Doing the Amazon shopping you're going to do anyway, I get a little kickback for it. I'll even have a link for this t-shirt down in the description, however long they decide to keep this t-shirt on Amazon, because I'm sure it'll get pulled. Anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.